The wind rolled down from the red cliffs like the breath of ghosts, carrying with it the smell of dust, sage, and the faint copper tang of blood that had dried too quickly beneath the sun. The high desert of New Mexico had a cruel stillness that day, broken only by the rhythmic creak of a leather thong pulling tight around a captive's wrists. His name was Elias Gray, an English wanderer turned prospector, and though he had seen enough of the American frontier to know fear, nothing prepared him for the faces that surrounded him, painted, silent, and unreadable beneath the glare of the noonday light. They were Apache, warriors of the Chiricahua band, proud and unbending. Among them stood Taza, the young son of a respected shaman, whose eyes carried both defiance and doubt. Elias knelt before them, his hands bound to a mesquite post, and his cracked lips trembled as he whispered the words that would haunt that canyon forever. "Please. I am begging you, untie me." The sentence came out like a prayer and an accusation all at once. Tradition demanded that captives suffer for the trespasses of their kind. Mercy was weakness, and weakness, the elders said, invited the ruin of the tribe. Yet when Taz's gaze met the prisoner's, those pale eyes sunken in pain, yet somehow still alive with desperate dignity, something inside the young warrior shifted. He heard his father's teachings, the stories of the ancestors who said that every spirit, even that of an enemy, deserved respect at the threshold of death. But he also heard the war songs of his brothers, the clatter of rifles seized from soldiers, the echo of vengeance older than any man's memory. The chief lifted his hand, signaling for the ritual to begin. A circle was drawn in the dirt, a sacred boundary between vengeance and forgiveness, and Elias was placed at its heart like an offering to ancient anger. The tribe's medicine man began to chant, low and rhythmic, invoking the spirits of the earth and sky to witness justice. Yet as the chant rose, a strange tension rippled through the camp. The wind stilled. A hawk circled overhead and let out a single cry, sharp and lonely. Some said it was a sign of approval. Others, especially Taza, felt it as a warning. The boy's fingers twitched toward the knife at his belt. He could almost hear his mother's voice from the spirit world, whispering against the roar of custom. Kindness is not betrayal if the gods see truth in it. He took one cautious step forward, then another, until he stood close enough to see the rope's fibers cutting into the captive's skin. Elias's breathing came in shallow bursts. Sweat streaked down his dirt-matted beard, glinting in the sun. "I came here for gold," he rasped, "not for war." His words made several warriors laugh, bitterly, as though the line between greed and invasion were invisible to white men. Taza didn't laugh. He saw instead a mirror of his own confusion, the way both their worlds seemed trapped in cycles they hadn't chosen. The chief barked a command, and Taza froze. It was time. The punishment would begin, and with it, his final chance to prove loyalty to his people. But loyalty to whom? To the ancestors who demanded blood, or to the silent voice inside him that whispered of a greater balance? The knife trembled in his hand. His heart pounded so loudly he thought the spirits themselves could hear it. Then Elias spoke again, softer, almost pleading with destiny itself. "If you untie me, I will not run. I swear it. Just, please." That single please carried the weight of oceans, of 1,000 miles between two civilizations that barely understood each other. The desert seemed to listen. Even the chanting faltered. For the first time in his life, Taza felt that tradition was not an iron chain but a test of the soul. He turned to the chief and said something no one expected. "Let the spirits decide," he declared. Gasps followed. The medicine man's chant stopped altogether. The chief's face hardened like carved granite. "You would defy the old ways?" he demanded. Taza shook his head. "No, father, I would understand them." He plunged his knife into the sand beside the prisoner, cutting the air but not the rope, and knelt down so that only Elias could hear him. "When the sun falls," he whispered, "watch the shadow of the cliffs. When it touches your feet, pull." Then he rose and stepped back into the circle, heart pounding, praying no one had noticed. But someone had. The chief's brother, Nanton, a man whose hatred burned hotter than the desert sun. His narrowed eyes promised trouble. The ritual resumed, yet its power had changed. Doubt crept through the ranks like smoke. And as the day bled into dusk, a storm began to gather on the horizon, carrying thunder from the far mountains like the drumbeat of fate. Night fell like a cloak of judgment. The sky above the Chiricahua Canyon was a sheet of burning stars, so clear it felt the heavens themselves were watching. The fire in the Apache camp crackled low, painting faces in shades of amber and doubt. Elias sat tied to the post, his wrists raw and his mind fading between memory and pain. He thought of England, of the rain that smelled like home, of the brother he'd promised to send gold to and never did. Somewhere in that half-dream he heard the sound of a drum, steady, mournful, ancient. The tribe was preparing for the execution at dawn. But amid the rhythm, he also heard something else, a whisper of movement, soft as a snake through sand. Taza crouched behind the rocks, every nerve alive with terror. He had spent the last hours torn between voices, the law of his people and the mercy of his spirit. When he finally crept to the prisoner, he saw Elias's face turned upward, eyes hollow but awake. No words passed between them. Taza drew his knife, the same blade that earlier had trembled with indecision, and in one swift motion cut the rope. The strands snapped like thunder. Elias fell forward, catching himself on his knees, gasping as though the air were a miracle. "Go," Taza hissed, pointing toward the narrow gorge that led to the river. But Elias didn't move. "They'll kill you," he rasped. "You helped me." Taza's jaw clenched. "They already will, whether you leave or not." For a heartbeat they just looked at each other. Two men divided by language, united by the one thing that outlives every empire, the need to be free. Then Elias rose and staggered into the darkness. Taza watched until he was swallowed by the canyon, and only then did he turn back toward the campfire's glow, where the chief and Nanton waited. He knew they had seen him. He could feel the weight of their eyes long before he stepped into the circle of light. The camp went silent. The wind itself seemed to pause. "You broke the bond of the ancestors," Nanton said coldly. "You released the enemy." Taza stood tall, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "No, I released a man." Nanton's fury ignited. He lunged forward, but the chief raised his hand. The old man's eyes, weary and wet with disappointment, locked on his son's. "You have shamed us," he said. "You have chosen your own heart over your blood." Taza met his father's gaze without flinching. Maybe the spirits wanted a heart this time. The words rippled through the warriors like lightning, half blasphemy, half revelation. Before anyone could speak, thunder rolled across the canyon. The storm that had brooded all day finally broke, scattering sparks from the fire as rain slammed down. In that chaos, Nanton struck. The knife flashed in the firelight, and Taza barely turned in time to take the blow in his shoulder instead of his chest. He fell back, the world spinning, pain roaring through him. But before Nanton could strike again, the chief stepped between them. "Enough," he thundered. The old man's voice cut through the storm. He looked at Taza, his son, bleeding and defiant, and something in his face softened. "Perhaps mercy is not weakness," he murmured, barely audible. Then he turned to the others. "Let the spirits judge this night. No man here will touch him again." The warriors lowered their weapons. Tradition had not been broken. It had been rewritten. When dawn came, the storm had washed the blood and ashes into the river. Taza stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, his wound bound with cloth. He watched the horizon burn gold as the sun climbed, and far in the distance, he thought he saw movement, a figure limping toward the mountains. Elias, alive. For a long time, Taza didn't move. Then he whispered a single prayer in his native tongue, a plea for the stranger's safety and for the forgiveness of his ancestors. Behind him, the tribe stirred to a new day. Some would call him a traitor, others a prophet. He didn't care. He had chosen the harder path, the one where humanity outweighed hate. Years later, white settlers would speak of a lone Apache who refused to kill, who walked away from war and vanished into legend. Some said he joined a band of wanderers heading east, others that he died alone in the desert, smiling at the sky. But the truth, carried on the wind through the mesas and ravines, was that mercy had changed the desert that night. The land remembered, and so did the souls who'd witnessed it. As for Elias Gray, when he finally reached the nearest town weeks later, broken and fevered, he told anyone who would listen about the Apache who saved his life. Most laughed, a few believed, but every time he told the story, he would end with the same words, whispered as if he was still in that circle of dust and fire. He freed me, and in doing so, freed himself. The story spread, crossing oceans and generations, until it became not a tale of the frontier but a reminder that compassion can outlive the gun. And if you're listening to this now, sitting in comfort far from that storm, remember, the Wild West wasn't built only by guns and greed. It was shaped by the rare souls who dared to choose mercy when the world demanded vengeance. So if stories like this move you, if you believe legends should carry meaning, subscribe to the channel, because more forgotten tales of courage, honor, and heart are waiting beyond the next ridge of history.